Las Vegas, 2013. Evan Carrow worked nights behind a crowded bar on Fremont Street. On a Thursday at 2:15 a.m., surveillance showed him leaving through the back door with a man no one could name. Minutes later, his phone powered off. He was never seen alive again. Police searched casinos, motels, desert roads. They found only fragments. A sedan with plates to no one, a bar uniform torn, a ledger with debts written in hurried ink. His mother, Evan Carrow, filed reports until the pages blurred. Years later, sealed evidence files surfaced. Inside was a pen from a discount hotel, cracked, bagged, marked Exhibit A. It was the same pen Evan carried in his pocket the night he disappeared. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Las Vegas in 2013 still pulsed long after midnight. Fremont Street throbbed with neon and the endless shuffle of tourists chasing noise, color, and distraction. Inside a narrow bar tucked off the main drag, Evan Carrow stacked glasses, wiped the counter, and tried to finish his shift. The place was thick with cigarette haze and the metallic thump of slot machines from next door. To regulars, he was only another young bartender paying rent on tips and overtime. To the camera mounted in the corner, he was the last person still moving when the doors closed. At 2:15 a.m., footage showed him pushing through the rear exit, jacket in one hand, cigarette in the other. His stride was unhurried, but the angle caught his eyes, flicking once toward the lens, as if checking whether someone was watching. Behind him came a man in a dark coat, his face never tilted toward the light. The timestamp froze at 2:15 a.m., then jumped forward, 2 minutes lost in static. When the picture returned, the alley was empty. Only a dumpster and a patch of oil glistened under fluorescent spill. Vincent Hale, who had closed down with him, swore Evan planned to meet a ride back to his apartment. No rideshare confirmed it. No taxi driver remembered it. What survived was the recording locked onto a disc and cataloged inside police storage. The anomaly in the timer became its own note. Gap of 2 minutes between frames, device error or interference. The report stopped there. Cold words for a living man's last steps. Evan's routine had left little else. His locker still held a clean shirt, rolled tie, and half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. His tip jar money was gone, counted out before he left. On his dresser at home, next to unopened mail, lay a ballpoint pen stamped with the name of a low-rent hotel on the Strip. It was cheap plastic, the sort given free to any guest. No one knew how it got there, though Evan Carrow, his mother, remembered seeing him carry it clipped to his shirt when he hugged her 2 nights before. Detective Marla Rios, newly transferred from Phoenix, received the missing persons call that afternoon. She visited the bar first, checked the footage herself, and requested the copy. The tape machine stuttered on rewind, then spat out static. She stopped the reel at the frame where Evan's face filled the corner. His mouth half opened, eyes off to the right, cigarette burning down. That was the image Helen later saw when shown the file. A freeze of a sun walking into nothing. In Las Vegas, disappearances rarely triggered panic. People fled debts, skipped parole, chased new jobs, or simply decided not to be found. But the timing made this different. Evan had clocked out properly. He had no criminal record, no pending warrants. The only hint of trouble came from whispers at the bar that he asked too many questions about a man who ordered vodka without lime, always leaving bills too crisp to belong in that part of town. By evening, flyers with his photo were taped across downtown. Grainy copies of the security still. Evan frozen in the alley, stared back at gamblers and street performers. Helen pressed them onto poles herself, hands shaking. Vincent Hale folded stacks of them, muttering that the police would laugh at another lost bartender. But Marla Rios kept her tone flat. Every frame matters. Every object matters. She ordered the oil patch in the alley tested, though the result later read motor fluid, not biological. At the apartment, drawers showed signs of rapid searching. Shirts unfolded, receipts scattered. Helen insisted she had not touched them. The pen lay on the nightstand as if placed there with care. Rios sealed it in a bag, not for prints. They expected too many, but because it felt wrong to leave it behind. She logged it as miscellaneous object. It would become the first item in a chain that built a case brick by brick. Neighbors recalled hearing nothing. One mentioned a dark sedan idling behind the bar around 2 a.m. He could not describe the driver. The plate numbers, when asked, blurred in his memory, like dreams dissolve with daylight. Marla logged the statement anyway, her pen scratching across lined paper. She drew a box around the time, 2:15 a.m., to match the tape. Then she circled it twice. Witness memory never felt solid, but sometimes it aligned with machines. Helen sat at her kitchen table, staring at the bagged pen. Her husband had died years earlier, leaving Evan the one anchor. Now she faced detectives, questions, and silences. She pressed her palm against the flyer photo until the ink rubbed off. "He wouldn't just leave," she said. Marla nodded, making no promises. Las Vegas heard that line too often. For 3 days, the search stretched thin. Patrol cars circled motel lots, knocked on doors, asked desk clerks about guests named Carrow. One desk manager recalled a young man with dark hair asking whether a Frankie stayed there. He signed no register. He left no address. Still, the desk kept a guest book, names written in hurried scrawls. On the corner of a page was a half ink blot, shaped like the same logo stamped on the cheap plastic pen. It was not enough for an arrest. It was barely enough for suspicion. But Rios highlighted the entry in yellow and slid the copy into a folder marked Carrow, Evan. She taped the flyer inside the front cover, so every time she opened it, the frozen face looked back. The file was slim then, no thicker than a pamphlet. It would grow heavier as months passed. For now, it began with a single object, a missing man, and 2 minutes of vanished video. At 4 p.m. that Sunday, Helen stood outside the bar, looking at the alley. The heat pressed down, baking the asphalt into waves. Nothing remained of her son except a still image and a pen in plastic. Yet in silence, the space felt weighted, as if holding breath for something unsaid. The camera froze on Evan's face before vanishing into shadow. By the 4th day, the case shifted from a missing person report into something heavier. The hope that Evan Carrow might walk through the door thinned with each unanswered call. Detective Marla Rios sat in the precinct briefing room with Officer Grant Decker, a veteran who had worked Vegas streets long enough to know how quickly people could vanish in the glow of neon. The file before them was still thin, one freeze frame from surveillance, a witness who could not remember license plates, and a ballpoint pen sealed in a clear bag. Decker leaned back in his chair and said what most already thought. Bartenders come and go. Could be he ran. Rios wrote 2 words across her pad. Phone died. Evan's cell phone records showed his device powering down at 2:17 a.m. The detail landed like a dull weight in the file. No outgoing calls. No texts. Just an abrupt end, minutes after the camera captured him. The shutdown location pinged on a tower south of Fremont, triangulated near the empty industrial strip. Rios marked it with a pin on the map. A stretch of warehouses, shuttered storefronts, and gravel lots. Too empty for accident, too exposed for comfort. Helen Carrow returned daily to the precinct. She carried stacks of flyers, her hands ink-stained from the cheap printer at home. She pressed them into the hands of passing officers, into the lobby clerk's grasp, onto bulletin boards already crowded with faces. Each copy bore Evan's image cropped from the surveillance still, timestamp in the corner, his face blurred in motion. She carried them like prayers, paper that curled under the dry heat. In her voice was steel. He would not leave me. He would not leave debts. Find who he was with. At the apartment, detectives combed again. Receipts scattered on the floor were collected. One bore the imprint of a bar tab for $40 and a cigarette pack. Time stamped 1:52 a.m. Evan had paid cash. Another slip showed a purchase of gasoline, dated a week earlier, paid by card. Small things. fragments of routine. Helen stood in the doorway, watching every object lifted, bagged, labeled. On the dresser, the missing pen left its echo, a clip-shaped dent pressed into the wood where it had rested too long. Rios ran her finger across the groove. Even absence left a mark. Across town, a man remembered seeing Evan step into a sedan. His statement shifted under questions. Sometimes he recalled a black car, sometimes gray. Sometimes a woman in the passenger seat, sometimes no one at all. Rios wrote down each version, circling the contradictions. She asked him to sign the bottom of the page, then slid it into the file. Memory was brittle, she knew. She knew what held firmer was the silence of the phone, the exact timestamp that did not move. Vincent Hale, Evan's co-worker, sat in the bar's back office for interview. He tapped his fingers against the desk, eyes moving between the floor and the detective's badge. "We all heard he was asking about Frankie," Vincent muttered. "Guy with the nice suits. Didn't belong in a place like ours." When pressed, he claimed ignorance, that it was only rumor. Rios noted his hesitation, the way his fingers paused each time Evan's name was spoken. She logged the interview, requested the bar's receipts, and highlighted Frankie's tab, though no surname followed it. Just a first name, written sloppy in the bartender's hand. Forensic returned the oil stain from the alley as simple motor fluid. Nothing human. But the phone data remained. The 2-minute gap on the tape paired too neatly with the 2-minute window before the phone went silent. As though someone had moved him fast into a vehicle, signal cut at once. Rios did not say it aloud, but the thought etched deeper with each passing day. Helen searched her son's dresser again when detectives left. She found nothing more than folded shirts, a stack of unpaid bills, and a card from his father's funeral. But in the pocket of one shirt, she touched something small and hard. A plastic pen cap, identical to the hotel pen sealed in evidence. She placed it in her palm and carried it to the station. "He kept these," she whispered. "Don't let them say he walked away." Rios logged it, bagged it, noted the matching logo. 2 pens now, 1 whole, 1 only a fragment. Both tied to a hotel Evan had no reason to visit. The precinct map grew heavier with pins and red ink. Warehouse lots, motel corners, gas stations. The circle widened but pointed nowhere. At 6 p.m., Rios closed her notebook and looked once more at the frozen image on the screen. Evan's eyes turned to the side, mouth half open, cigarette smoke lifting. Behind him, the man in shadow blurred by static. The tape did not give names. It offered only a silent witness to vanishing. That night, Helen walked past the bar again. Flyers curled against the lampposts. The street swelled with tourists who did not look up. She stood in the alley, tracing the oil patch now gone, and whispered her son's name. No one answered. From a distance, neon signs flickered, buzzing in the desert dark. She closed her eyes and saw only the empty passenger door of a sedan opening. It was a vision without sound, but weight enough to crush breath. The sedan's plates were registered to no one at all. By the second week, the case had already begun to fray under rumor. Word traveled across Fremont Street faster than paper flyers could hold it. Patrons whispered that Evan Carrow owed money, that he played cards after shifts, that his tips fed slot machines in the back rooms. The police file absorbed these fragments, each recorded in careful handwriting, but none confirmed. Still, one truth cut sharper than speculation. A handwritten ledger seized in a routine sweep listed debts owed to a man already known by one name: Frankie. The ledger had been pulled from a small apartment south of the Strip, the kind with broken blinds and a metal door scarred from past searches. Inside, officers found crumpled receipts, poker chips from casinos that no longer existed, and a notebook filled with names. Some names were scratched out, others trailed by numbers. Evan Carrow's name appeared near the bottom, written in smaller letters, as though added later. Next to it, 2 words: last call. The ink smeared where a thumb had pressed too hard, but the shape of each letter remained clear enough for a trained eye. The discovery added no body, no vehicle, but it shifted the tone. This was no voluntary disappearance. Detective Marla Rios studied the page under the harsh light of the evidence room. The handwriting leaned right, pressed deep, as though urgency and anger traveled together through the pen. Forensic analysts compared it to other notes seized from Frankie Delano, a man whose file was already thick with arrests and dismissals. The strokes aligned. Not conclusively, not enough for indictment, but enough to breathe smoke into suspicion. The ledger entered evidence under a new tag, boxed and filed. Yet one detail made Rios pause. The bookmark pressed between the pages was not paper at all. It was a ballpoint pen, cheap plastic, stamped with the name of the same hotel linked to Evan's belongings. A hotel that kept surfacing like a refrain. Evan Carrow was shown the ledger only briefly. Her hands trembled when she saw her son's name written there. "He never played cards," she insisted, though her voice wavered. Rios did not argue. In this city, debts grew even when the debtor never touched the table. Guilt traveled by association. Rumor hardened into accounts payable. Helen clutched the flyer tighter, unwilling to accept the ink on the page as proof. To her, the pen pressed between the covers meant something else. A piece of her son folded into someone else's record. Outside the precinct, Vincent Hale avoided questions. When pressed again, he admitted he had heard Evan asking about Frankie Delano, the man in tailored suits who slipped into the bar's darkest corners. Frankie never paid tabs with coins, only with bills folded crisp, sometimes too crisp, smelling of starch and ink. "Evan joked once," Vincent muttered. "Said you could iron the money right out of the man's pocket." Rios wrote the line into her notebook, a sentence that sounded too careless to survive in the world Frankie inhabited. Frankie Delano himself walked Fremont with an ease that unsettled. He was seen in camera stills, entering motels, stepping out of cars that bore no plates. He left no trail long enough for charge. He carried 2 phones, spoke little, and always moved in the company of men whose names shifted like sand. To outsiders, he was a rumor made flesh. To investigators, he was the dark line between disappearance and certainty. The ledger bound his name to Evans, if only by ink. Forensic review of the ledger offered no solace. The paper carried prints layered so thick they became smudges. Only one partial fingerprint stood apart, pressed against the back cover. It was Evans. The comparison confirmed it with quiet certainty. He had touched the book, if only once, if only briefly. The question became not if he was listed there, but why his own mark lingered on the object that catalogued his absence. Rios visited the hotel that had stamped its logo on the pens. The lobby smelled of bleach and stale smoke. Behind the counter, the clerk scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. He remembered no guest named Carrow. When asked about Frankie, his eyes flicked toward the door before muttering he could not recall. The guest registry offered little, only a blur of handwriting, names that could not be verified. Yet taped beneath the counter was a box of identical pens, plastic bodies stacked like ammunition, ready to be handed out. Rios slipped one into her palm and studied it. Mundane, weightless, disposable. Yet this pen had already threaded itself through Evan's room, his dresser, and now the ledger that catalogued debts. Ordinary object turned echo. In the precinct's evidence room, the pens multiplied. Each one bagged, tagged, entered under separate numbers. Each one a chorus repeating the same name, the same logo. Rios arranged them on the table, one beside the other, until they formed a line of plastic soldiers. Helen, when shown them, whispered that her son used to click the pens open and closed when nervous. "It was a habit," she said. Now the sound was absent, replaced by the sterile silence of evidence bags. The ledger, thick with names and numbers, sat at the center of the file. On its page, Evan's name did not fade. The ink dried, smudged, but remained visible, defiant. Officers flipped through, reading each alias, each scratched line. Some belonged to men already dead, some to those still walking the streets. But Evan's entry was fresh, too fresh to be ignored. It hung like a verdict written before trial. That night, in the evidence room, the fluorescent lights buzzed. The camera mounted in the corner recorded nothing unusual. A book, a pen, a tag. Yet in the stillness, the page seemed to breathe. The ink shimmered faintly where it caught the light. It was not movement, only the illusion of it. But for the investigators staring down at the ledger, it felt like watching a voice whisper from the page. The ink smeared as if written in a rush to vanish. The warehouse sat on the edge of Las Vegas, in a district of half-lit lots and storage units lined up like forgotten tombs. It was here. Detective Marla Rios followed the lead scribbled in the ledger, an address scrawled in cramped writing beneath a row of debts. The place looked abandoned, corrugated steel walls tagged with spray paint. The padlock rusted but loose. At 10 a.m., she stepped inside with a warrant and a forensics team. The air was stale, smelling of dust and something metallic that clung to the throat. The light from their flashlights cut across stacks of broken furniture, crates filled with empty bottles, and one chair set alone in the center of the floor. Its arms were scarred from rope friction, its legs braced by bolts drilled into the concrete. Dark stains bloomed beneath it. Forensic swabs later confirmed what eyes already knew: dried blood, soaked too deep into the concrete to wash away. The cloth of a bartender's uniform was wedged beneath one leg, torn at the sleeve. When tested, the DNA matched Evan Carrow. The confirmation hardened rumor into fact. Marla watched as the evidence was catalogued. Each swab, each fabric shred, sealed in plastic, marked and logged. But what struck her most was something almost overlooked: a cheap ballpoint pen, snapped in two, lying near the stain. The same hotel logo glared from its cracked barrel. She picked it up with tweezers, studied the break. The ink cartridge had bled across the concrete, leaving a thin streak that ended inches from the chair. It was the second time the pen appeared, no longer trivial, now placed in the middle of violence. She sealed it in a bag. Exhibit 2. The warehouse walls carried no other signs of life. Dust filmed every surface, disturbed only around the chair. The back door bore fresh scrape marks, as though dragged open by force. Outside, tire tracks arced into gravel, then vanished where wind swept them smooth. Photographs captured each groove before the desert erased them. The tracks were too faint for vehicle identification, but their presence alone gave a story. Someone had brought Evan here, held him, and carried him away again. The press caught wind before the family was told. Headlines spoke of a crime scene tied to organized debt collection. Evan's face, clipped from the flyer, ran beside images of the warehouse taped in caution tape. Helen Carrow sat in her kitchen, television flickering. She did not speak as the anchor read the words. Instead, she clutched the bagged pen given back to her for identification. "It was his," she whispered. "He clicked them all the time." Marla noted her statement, though grief blurred the words. Vincent Hale grew quieter after the discovery. He stopped answering his phone, stopped showing up to shifts. When finally tracked down, his eyes darted constantly, scanning the street as he spoke. "I didn't think it was real," he muttered. "I thought Evan was just messing around, saying Frankie was dangerous. Nobody touches Frankie." He lit a cigarette, hands trembling, ash scattering on his shirt. Rios pressed him harder, but he retreated into silence, his testimony folding in on itself. Fear, more than guilt, sealed his lips. Forensics took weeks to process the warehouse. Blood analysis confirmed at least 2 types. One was Evan's, the other unidentified. DNA submitted to national databases returned nothing. Unknown donor. The chair was dismantled, bolts removed and bagged. The rope fibers clung stubbornly, cut clean through, suggesting release was never meant to be gentle. Photos lined the caseboard, each image pinned with red thread. The alley, the ledger, the warehouse. At the center, Evan's freeze frame from the bar camera, eyes half turned, cigarette burning. At 6 p.m., Marla walked the perimeter again. The desert wind shifted, carrying sand into the footprints left by her team. Soon the site would return to emptiness, only evidence bags holding what the earth had given up. She paused at the spot where the broken pen had lain. Without it, the stain seemed quieter, less certain. The pen had turned silence into narrative, ordinary plastic into testimony. She wondered if someone left it on purpose, a trace to be found, or if it simply fell in the chaos of violence. Helen visited the site days later, escorted under tape. She stood in the center of the floor, refusing to move closer to the stain. "This isn't him," she said, voice firm. "This is what they did." She placed a flyer against the wall, taping it where paint peeled. A small act of defiance against the silence. The paper curled in the dry air, its corners lifting as though trying to escape. The case file grew heavier. Each new report, each photo, thickened the folder. Inside, the broken pen sat beside the original, two artifacts speaking louder than testimony. Marla stared at them both, wondering how many more would surface before the story ended. Two pens, two sites, one missing man. The line connecting them tightened. Night fell over the city. Fremont Street pulsed on, uncaring, neon bouncing off tourists' sunglasses. In the precinct evidence room, the bagged pen glistened under fluorescent light, its fracture running like a scar across its cheap plastic body. On paper, it was logged as Item 14B. In silence, it screamed louder than any witness. The broken pen lay beside the blood like a discarded witness. The call came just after midnight, anonymous and without preamble. The voice was distorted, a cheap prepaid phone pressed too close to the mouthpiece. "The bartender asked the wrong question," it said. And then silence. The line cut before dispatch could trace it. The message was logged, the recording bagged as digital evidence. It added no names, but the phrasing pressed weight on the case. Evan Carrow had not stumbled into danger. He had spoken, and it had cost him. Detective Marla Rios followed the signal back as far as the tower data allowed. The call originated near a stretch of casinos off Boulder Highway, a cluster of neon motels and pawn shops that catered to those with no better options. Officers combed the sidewalks, peered into shuttered storefronts, asked clerks if anyone had left a phone behind. By morning, the object appeared, a burner phone, cracked and discarded beside a dumpster behind a low-rent casino. Its casing was split, its SIM card torn clean in half. Forensics lifted the shards into evidence, logging the number, recording the international mobile equipment identity. It was the kind of phone designed for vanishing. Helen Carrow was told gently that the call had come, but not the content. She sat at her kitchen table, eyes on the flyers still scattered across the surface. "Somebody knows," she said, voice flat. "They're just afraid." Marla nodded, though she already knew fear was a currency heavier than money. In Las Vegas, silence was bought, traded, and enforced. The casino that yielded the phone had cameras, though half were outdated, their images blurred. One frame, taken at 11:45 p.m., showed a man in a dark jacket stepping into the back lot. The pen clipped to his shirt pocket caught light briefly as he turned. Rios froze the frame, enlarged it. Cheap plastic, stamped with the same hotel logo. Another pen, another silent link. She logged the image, added it to the board beside the broken pens already sealed. The symbol shifted from oddity to thread, weaving through every site touched by the case. Vincent Hale was summoned once more. His story had worn thin, his nerves frayed by the weight pressing closer. "I heard him," Vincent muttered, cigarette shaking between his fingers. "Evan asked Frankie why he came to our place. Said the money didn't match the neighborhood." He rubbed ash into the tabletop, voice breaking. "You don't ask Frankie that. You don't ask him anything." When asked why he had never told this before, Vincent dropped his gaze. "Because I like breathing." Rios wrote it down, logged it, and said nothing further. The burner phone's last outgoing text pointed to another number already in the files, registered to Frankie Delano under a fake name. The message was one word: done. Time stamped at 2:19 a.m., 2 minutes after Evan's phone went silent. Rios read it twice, the blunt finality gnawing at her. She circled the time in red ink, connecting it with the frozen camera frame, the ledger, the warehouse stain. A pattern emerged, not clean, but undeniable. Each fragment bent toward Frankie, though never close enough for chains. At 3 p.m. the following day, a sweep was conducted near Frankie's known haunts. Agents entered a side motel room registered under a woman's alias. The space reeked of bleach. Sheets stripped, mattress flipped, walls wiped with harsh chemical streaks. On the dresser, tucked beneath an ashtray, lay another pen. The clip was bent, plastic body scorched at the tip. Forensic testing revealed trace soot, as if it had been held briefly to flame. No prints survived, but the logo still shone through the smoke damage. Another addition, another echo. Helen saw the latest evidence during a visit. She touched the plastic through the bag, fingertips trembling. "It's like they wanted him erased," she whispered. Rios offered no answer. She logged the statement, closed the folder, and returned to the board. 4 pens now lined its surface, each pinned beside a different site. They resembled a trail left intentionally, a signature woven from disposables. The precinct grew restless. Officers muttered that no one would ever testify against Frankie, that cases had folded before for lack of courage. Rios refused the defeat, her eyes fixed on the scattered objects that grew into testimony. A ledger, a broken chair, a stain on concrete, a phone smashed beyond repair, and now a burned pen. Each item spoke louder than mouths willing to talk. By dusk, the casino alley where the phone had been found sat empty again. Neon flickered across oil-stained pavement, shadows shifting as taxis rolled past. The dumpster loomed, silent, holding no more secrets. Yet the air seemed heavier there, as if memory itself lingered. The call had ended abruptly, voice clipped, words cut short. The bartender asked the wrong question. It echoed now, a phrase carved into the silence, refusing to fade. The burner phone was smashed, its SIM torn clean in half. The search warrant for Frankie Delano's apartment came at dawn. Federal agents joined the local detectives, their vehicles lined along the curb in silence before the door splintered under the ram. Inside, the apartment reeked of stale cigars and spilled whiskey. Curtains drawn tight blocked the sun. A television still glowed, muted, stuck on a sports channel looping highlights. In the center of the cluttered room sat a wooden desk, covered with papers that looked too organized to belong in chaos. Marla Rios moved first. She slid on gloves and opened the top drawer. Inside lay a ledger, not unlike the first one seized, but thicker, pages worn from constant use. She flipped through entries marked with initials, dollar amounts, and terse notes. Halfway through, Evan Carrow's name appeared again, circled once, followed by a single word in red ink, "Done." Her jaw tightened. The book was sealed quickly, bagged, tagged. This time, partial fingerprints clung to the cover. They matched Frankie's. Cash bundles lay stacked inside a shoebox, each bound with rubber bands. The bills were marked in sequential order, traced later to casinos on the Strip. Beneath them rested receipts from pawn shops, hotel slips, and cigarette cartons. Each was logged and bagged. But what froze Marla was an object buried at the bottom of the drawer. Another hotel pen, this one unbroken, ink stains across its tip. The logo glared back like a signature repeating itself. She sealed it under a new tag, adding it to the growing chain of pens that now carried the case forward like breadcrumbs scattered across the city. Frankie was taken into custody without comment. His expression never shifted, his eyes steady, lips pressed into a line. At booking, he requested an attorney, gave no statement, and offered no reaction when told of the evidence. To him, silence was shield and weapon. Marla wrote the note herself. No statement, no emotion, no admission. The forensics lab moved faster this time. The ledger entries revealed more than names. Next to Evan's circled line was a series of numbers resembling dates. One coincided with the night Evan disappeared. Another pointed forward, a week later, marked with the word delivery. Investigators speculated it referenced a transaction, perhaps payment for silence. Whatever its meaning, it cemented the belief that Evan's disappearance was deliberate, recorded like any other business entry in the world Frankie served. Evan Carrow was brought in again. She sat quietly as Marla explained that Evan's name appeared once more, underlined now in red. Helen's hands shook as she pressed her palm against the photograph of the page. "They wrote him out like he was nothing," she whispered. Her voice cracked but steadied with anger. "You find the rest. Don't stop." The agents returned with additional items: envelopes containing photographs of unknown men, receipts for wire transfers, and phone records linking Frankie's burner number to several casino payphones. None carried Evan's name, but together they painted the outline of a network. Organized, deliberate, built to make men vanish. In evidence, the pens now formed a sequence: whole, broken, burned, and now ink-stained. Each bagged, each tagged, each adding weight to the board in the precinct. Marla stood before them, the line of plastic artifacts more haunting than the photographs pinned around them. Disposable objects turned into permanent testimony. Vincent Hale was pressed again. Confronted with photos of the ledger, he broke under pressure. "He asked about Frankie," Vincent admitted, his eyes darting toward the door. "He said the money Frankie carried didn't belong to him. That's what got him marked. Once you're in that book, you don't get out." His voice faltered. "I saw Evan write something down. He used one of those pens. He carried it out, like proof." The words added another layer. Evan had touched the ledger himself, left behind the partial fingerprint, and perhaps carried away the very pen later found broken on the warehouse floor. The cycle closed tighter. Frankie remained silent in custody, his attorney filing motions. No confession came, no admission, but silence could not erase the weight of paper, ink, and plastic stacked in evidence lockers. Each ledger entry, each numbered receipt, each pen connected to a man last seen stepping into shadow. At 11 p.m., Marla sat alone in the evidence room. The pens glimmered under fluorescent light, cheap bodies trapped in plastic sleeves. She thought of how easily they were handed out in hotel lobbies, tossed into drawers, forgotten. Yet here they returned, each one carrying a story heavier than its weight. She reached for the newest, ink still staining its tip, and stared until the lines blurred. When the case file was updated, the last page carried only a single word, circled in red, from the ledger seized that morning. Silence. One word circled in red. Silence. The circle widened beyond Frankie Delano. Ledger entries hinted at larger transactions, payments flowing through hands too many for one man to control. Federal agents traced one alias, then another, until a name repeated across receipts for rental units in North Las Vegas. The search led them to a warehouse district where concrete shells stood vacant, doors rusted and half-fallen. One unit bore a new padlock. Inside, investigators expected dust and trash. Instead, they found order. Stacked against the walls were crates marked with casino logos, emptied of contents but not erased of scent. A metal filing cabinet leaned open, its drawers stripped except for one box sealed with a rubber band. Inside lay a collection of hotel room keys, each stamped with numbers, each belonging to the same budget chain that had given out the pens. More than a dozen, room numbers spanning years. At the bottom of the box, a faded receipt listed bulk purchases: cigarettes, liquor, cleaning supplies, all delivered to a single bar near Fremont Street. Evan's Bar. Marla Rios studied the keys with care. The numbers scratched into the brass were worn, but legible. She ran her gloved finger across one stamped 214. Later, hotel records showed that room had been occupied by a man under the alias Carlton Madsen, months before Evan disappeared. The link pulled threads tighter. The bar where Evan worked had not been coincidence. It had been selected, folded into a pattern of transactions stretching years back. The forensic team bagged every key, every receipt. Under UV light, faint residue appeared on several key tags. Grease mixed with faint traces of blood protein. Too degraded to match, but enough to log. Each item was placed in evidence, the box sealed. Among the items was one stray pen, clipped to the edge of a key tag. Cheap, plastic. The logo fading, but still visible. Another echo, another tie. Evan Carrow sat in the briefing room when shown the photos. Her face stayed blank, as though expression itself had drained. "They used his work like a front," she said quietly. "He didn't even know." Her words settled into the silence. Heavy, undeniable. The bar had been stage. Evan, the unintended actor. The FBI liaison, Special Agent Warren, briefed the team. "This is a network," he said. "Money laundering through bars, motels, pawn shops. Small movements, less visible than big casinos." Carrow asked about the wrong man at the wrong table. "That's the trigger." His words felt clinical, stripped of sympathy. To him, Evan was a data point on a graph. To Helen, he was flesh turned paper. In the precinct, the evidence board thickened. Photos of keys lined beside photos of pens, ledgers, receipts. Red thread webbed across, stretching from the alley behind Fremont Street to warehouses and hotels. At its center remained the freeze frame. Evan's face caught mid-turn. Each new artifact made the image heavier, as if the frozen eyes began to know what would follow. Marla visited the hotel once more, pressing the clerk about the bulk key orders. He shrugged, insisting he knew nothing. His hands shook faintly as he signed the interview statement. Later, reviewing surveillance, she caught his reflection in a mirror behind the counter. A pen clipped to his collar. The same logo. Routine detail, turned omen. By nightfall, the warehouse unit stood empty again, only tape marking where crates once leaned. The air smelled faintly of bleach, though no cleaning crew had entered. Silence hung across the lot. The doors rattled faintly in the wind, metallic echoes bouncing between the concrete shells. Evidence already sealed carried the weight forward. What remained in the space was absence, as though someone had scrubbed not just surfaces, but memory itself. The box of keys rattled though no one touched it. The testimony came from a bartender named Luis Ortega, a man who had worked shifts alongside Evan Carrow but never been questioned until months later. He was nervous in the interview room, tapping his knee under the table, his eyes fixed on the recording light overhead. "Evan used to write down things," Luis began, voice low. "Not drink orders, codes, like he was trying to track something he didn't want anyone else to see." Detective Marla Rios slid a bagged slip across the table, one of the many scraps collected from the bar's trash. Luis leaned forward, confirming it. The paper showed lines of drink orders, but every fourth order carried a strange mark, a small cross, sometimes a circle. "He said certain guys always ordered the same way," Luis continued. "Vodka without lime, whiskey neat, bills too crisp." He thought it meant something. Forensic review of the slip revealed nothing but cheap ink, smeared from condensation. Yet in the margin, faint indentations showed where Evan had pressed harder. The outline of a number appeared when a light was angled across the page. 214, the same hotel room number found in the key box. The connection solidified. Evan had been mapping patterns, building his own crude investigation from behind the bar counter. The pen that marked the slips was no longer speculation. Luis confirmed he had seen Evan use one of the cheap hotel pens to jot notes. "He carried it all the time," Luis said. "Clicked it open, clicked it shut, like it steadied him." Rios logged the statement, circled it in her notes. Each pen collected so far had felt like coincidence. Now it was proof of intent, a tool Evan wielded in his search for answers. The slips multiplied as staff cleaned out drawers. Some showed only routine orders. Others carried the strange marks. Together they mapped certain nights, certain customers. The names on tabs matched aliases already found in Frankie Delano's ledger. The cycle closed tighter, one bartender's curiosity folding into the records of a syndicate. Evan Carrow listened to the findings with a mixture of pride and dread. "He was looking for the truth," she said softly. "He didn't know it would kill him." She pressed her hands against the photocopied slips, fingertips brushing the faint outlines of numbers Evan had drawn. Each mark, a breadcrumb. Each note, a step closer to the men who silenced him. Vincent Hale, when confronted with the slips, grew pale. "He told me once he thought the orders were codes," Vincent admitted. "Said Frankie was sending messages through drinks." I laughed. "Told him he'd been watching too much late-night TV." His laughter died as he realized the slips had outlived the man who wrote them. In evidence, the slips were catalogued and sealed. They lay beside the ledgers, the keys, and the growing row of pens. Each item ordinary, each transformed into weight. A bartender's handwriting became testimony, his pen a voice still speaking from absence. That night, Marla sat at her desk, slips spread across the surface. She arranged them in order, traced the marks, connected them with threads. The pattern emerged: certain nights, certain drinks, aligning with the dates in Frankie's ledger. Evan had not been paranoid. He had been right. He had stepped onto a map too dangerous to follow. At 11:30 p.m., Marla leaned back, fluorescent light buzzing above her. In the silence, she imagined Evan's hand pressing pen to paper, drawing marks no one else understood. The final slip stopped mid-line, ink trailing off as though the pen had been yanked away. It ended with half a word. Incomplete. Unfinished. The slip ended mid-sentence, ink dragged into nothing. The arrest came not from Frankie Delano, but from the man who moved beneath him. His name was Carlton Madsen, a broker of debts, a figure who never showed his face in casinos, yet always seemed to profit from their shadows. Agents cornered him in a parking lot near Henderson, his sedan boxed in by unmarked vehicles. He surrendered without a fight, hands raised, lips forming a smile that never touched his eyes. In the interrogation room, he spoke quickly, as if bargaining before anyone asked a question. "He wasn't supposed to die," Carlton said, voice steady. "It was just a lesson. The bartender asked too much. He needed to be reminded." He leaned forward, cuffs clinking against the table. "But someone got carried away. I didn't touch him." He slid the words across the table like cards, dealing guilt to someone else. Detective Marla Rios listened, expression unreadable. She slid a map across the table, unfolded from evidence. Red circles marked warehouses, motels, bars. Carlton tapped one circle with his finger. "There," he muttered. "That's where they took him, out in the desert, north of Sloan. You'll find what's left." His tone carried neither remorse nor fear, only resignation, as if every disappearance eventually found its way to sand. The map itself was seized from Carlton's car, folded, worn at the edges, its creases darkened by oil-stained fingers. Among the marks was one circle darker than the rest, drawn with heavy pressure. The ink bled through, leaving a faint shadow on the back. Forensics later noted the pen strokes matched the cheap hotel pens logged earlier. Another loop in the chain, another echo of plastic turned into artifact. Evan Carrow was told carefully of the statement. Her face stiffened as she listened. "They dumped him like garbage," she whispered. "But he's still my son." Her hand shook as she pressed the photo of the circled map against her chest. For her, the red mark was not evidence but a wound reopened. Agents prepared the excavation. Desert heat pressed down as they followed the coordinates. Rio stood beside the search crew, eyes fixed on the sand that gave nothing away. Tents rose, machines hummed, soil shifted. Hours passed, the land silent, but for the scrape of shovels and the whine of equipment. Dust clung to everything: clothes, skin, memory. The ledger, the slips, the map, all pointed here. The desert had swallowed men before. It gave back only what it chose. But by dusk, searchers found tire ruts etched faintly into the crust, their arcs converging on a single point. Photos captured the patterns before wind erased them. The site was marked, flagged, and logged. Work lights flickered on, painting the desert floor in harsh white. Carlton's words echoed in the briefing room that night. Not supposed to die. A claim meant to soften guilt, to blur lines. But the map carried his fingerprint, pressed near the circle. Forensic comparison confirmed it. He had touched the page, pressed the pen, marked the place. His denial could not erase ink. Marla stared at the artifact laid out under glass. The cheap pen's line still glistened faintly under fluorescent light, as though refusing to dry. She imagined Evan's slips, his careful marks, now mirrored by men who used pens to seal lives. Objects repeating, ordinary plastic turned into chorus. By 10 p.m., the evidence board stretched wall to wall. At its center remained Evan's freeze frame, the alley still locked in grain. Around it, pens, slips, keys, maps, ledgers. The web grew dense, the threads converging toward the desert. Each item louder than testimony, each one carrying the silence of a man who could no longer speak. In the interrogation cell, Carlton leaned back, cuffs glinting under harsh light. "You'll find him," he said. "And when you do, remember, this wasn't me." His smile lingered, faint, as if he believed the desert itself would hold his secrets. The circle on the map matched tire ruts in the dust. The excavation began at first light. Search crews moved with methodical patience, shovels cutting into sand that had held its silence for months. The flagged site lay just beyond the faint tire ruts Carlton Madsen identified, a depression barely visible under the morning sun. By noon, the first fragments surfaced, cloth threads, brittle with heat, colors dulled but still recognizable as the fabric of a bartender's uniform. The discovery stilled the air. Officers paused, cameras clicked, and the desert seemed to lean closer. Hours later, skeletal remains emerged, curled awkwardly, ribs twisted by time and weight of shifting soil. Each piece was lifted carefully, brushed, and sealed. Nearby, searchers uncovered a plastic badge lanyard, the metal clip still intact, its card cracked but legible. Evan Carrow's name glared through the dust, letters faded but unmistakable. The lanyard entered evidence sealed in plastic, cataloged with grim certainty. Forensics combed the soil deeper. Mixed among the bones lay shards of glass, bottle fragments, and coins dulled to green. But one object drew the team to silence. A pen barrel, snapped, lodged in compacted sand. Its ink cartridge had ruptured long ago, bleeding black stains into the soil. The logo stamped on its side, though eroded, still revealed the same hotel name. It was bagged, tagged, and entered as Exhibit C. The recurring symbol had now closed its loop, found beside what remained of Evan. Detective Marla Rios stood at the edge of the pit as bones were lifted one by one. She had seen many recoveries, but this site carried a stillness that pressed heavier than usual. A man once alive, once frozen on a camera frame, reduced to fragments cataloged by number. She wrote the note herself. Remains consistent with Evan Carrow, pending dental confirmation. It was an observation stripped of life, the only language evidence allowed. Helen Carrow arrived as dusk fell, escorted by officers. She stood behind the tape, eyes locked on the bags being carried to vans. She did not cry. She pressed her palm against her chest and whispered, "Bring him home." Her voice carried across the desert like a vow, faint but unbroken. She was shown the badge lanyard, her hand trembling as she touched the plastic through the bag. "That's his," she said. "He wore it every night." By evening, the desert floor was bare again. Holes filled, flags removed, machines silenced. Only the marks of digging remained, soon to be erased by wind. What endured was sealed in boxes, loaded into evidence trucks, filed into cold storage. The site closed, but the case opened wider. The discovery transformed rumor into crime, absence into homicide. At the forensic lab, dental records confirmed identity. Evan Carrow was no longer missing. He was recovered, his file shifted from disappearance to murder. Analysts compared bone trauma to restraints found on the warehouse chair. Patterns aligned. Ligature marks etched into wrist bones, consistent with rope fibers logged months earlier. The narrative wrote itself, layer by layer, artifact by artifact. Helen sat through the briefing, silent, her hands folded in her lap. "Now it's proof," Marla told her, voice flat. "Now it moves forward." Proof, though necessary, did not heal. It only deepened the void. Helen pressed her hand against the plastic bag holding the fractured pen. It was no longer just a habit in her son's pocket. It was the object that trailed his absence from bar to ledger to warehouse to desert. Ordinary plastic, final echo. The case board in the precinct reached saturation. Photos of the excavation site pinned beside maps, slips, ledgers, and pens. Red thread drew lines so dense they seemed to weave a net. At the center, Evan's face remained frozen, eyes turned sideways, cigarette burning. Around him, the evidence spoke in chorus. Night fell. The desert cooled. The excavation lights dimmed, shadows stretching across empty sand. In the evidence locker, the fractured pen lay sealed in its bag. Black ink dried into the soil it once bled into. Silent, permanent, undeniable. The pen fragment was sealed in a plastic evidence bag. The trial of Frankie Delano and Carlton Madsen opened in a packed Clark County courtroom. Reporters filled benches, their cameras banned, but their notebooks restless. The jury sat in silence as the prosecution laid out its case piece by piece, artifact by artifact. No body had once meant no crime. Now bones, slips, and ledgers spoke in chorus. The prosecutor began with the footage. Evan Carrow at 2:15 a.m., walking into the alley, shadowed by an unknown man. The screen froze on his face. Jurors leaned forward, the same image that had haunted flyers now magnified under court light. Next came the ledger, pages projected overhead. Evan's name circled in red ink with the word "done" scrawled beside it. The ink smear glared under the magnification, the tremor of a hand writing in haste. Then came the pens. Bagged in plastic, each labeled, they lined the evidence table like disposable witnesses. One whole, one broken, one burned, one found in desert soil. The prosecutor lifted the fractured pen, tagged Exhibit A, and held it before the jury. "This pen," he said, "was found beside bloodstains confirmed to be Evan Carrow's. The logo connects to the motel chain frequented by Delano's network. The ink streak aligns with the map where his remains were recovered. Ordinary objects, extraordinary proof." His voice stayed calm, letting silence fill the space after each sentence. Carlton Madsen shifted in his seat, eyes darting. Frankie Delano did not move, his jaw clenched, expression unreadable, the stillness of a man accustomed to shadows. The defense argued coincidence. Cheap pens given freely, names scribbled without intent, anonymous phones with no chain of custody. But the sequence grew heavier with each object revealed. Detective Marla Rios testified, her voice clipped, factual. She walked the jury through the board, the slips Evan wrote behind the bar, the partial fingerprint on the ledger, the DNA from the warehouse chair, the tire ruts in the desert. Each artifact pinned Evan's absence to deliberate hands. She stopped on the photo of the excavation, Evan's badge lifted from the soil. "This is not coincidence," she said. "This is continuity." Helen Carrow sat behind the prosecution table, silent, clutching the flyer now faded and torn. She did not watch Frankie. She stared at the pens as if they alone could speak for her son. When shown the fractured one, her breath caught. "That was his habit," she whispered to reporters outside. "Clicking pens. That's how I still hear him." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the room stilled. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, murder, conspiracy. Life sentences delivered in measured words, the gavel echoing like a final note. Carlton flinched, whispering under his breath. Frankie stared forward, eyes glass, expression unchanged. Reporters surged as the verdict was read. Headlines would later declare the syndicate fractured, its figures finally named. But in the courtroom, silence weighed heavier than noise. Every eye returned to the evidence table, where the pens still lay under glass. Disposable plastic, transformed into anchors of memory. That night, Marla returned to the evidence room. The fractured pen rested in its bag, Exhibit A. She wrote the final line in her notebook. "Testimony of objects sustained conviction." She closed the file, thicker now than any she had carried before. The jury stared longest at the cracked pen in glass. The sentencing ended under the same desert sun that had concealed Evan Carrow for so long. Frankie Delano received life without parole. Carlton Madsen, the broker who spoke too much when cornered, was handed the same. Chains of paperwork bound them tighter than steel cuffs. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps, microphones rising like bayonets, their voices chasing fragments of reaction. Evan Carrow walked past them, silent, flyers still folded in her hand. She did not need headlines. She carried the verdict in her chest, weight heavier than justice. Detective Marla Rios filed the last of the paperwork that week. The evidence lockers groaned with sealed bags, ledgers stacked like coffins, photographs pinned with dates, and the row of pens lined in order. Whole, broken, burned, fractured, each one tagged, logged, and filed as permanent testimony. Ordinary plastic, cheap advertising, now locked forever as artifacts of organized crime. She pressed her hand against the glass, staring at the cracked pen that had traveled from Evan's shirt pocket to warehouse floor to courtroom exhibit. Its silence outlasted testimony, outlasted excuses, outlasted lies. The city moved on, neon flashing as though nothing had been unearthed. Casinos opened, drinks poured, music thumped against glass walls. Yet beneath the noise, whispers shifted. Bartenders lowered their voices when certain names came up. Motel clerks looked twice before handing out free pens. The syndicate fractured, but fear still lingered like smoke in a closed room. Silence was not erased. It only changed hands. Helen visited the evidence room one final time. An officer escorted her, though she barely noticed. She asked to see the pen, the one marked Exhibit A. Through the glass, she looked at it as if it were her son's voice frozen mid-click. "Keep it safe," she whispered. "It's all that's left to hold." Her words were not recorded, not logged, but the guard heard them, and silence answered back. Marla closed the case file with one last note. Closure achieved, community impact ongoing. Yet closure felt hollow. Evan's story had ended, but the city's undercurrent had not. The web of debts, coded drinks, silent ledgers, cut in one place, but woven elsewhere. Justice came, but the system remained. On the courthouse steps, neon glow reflected on rain-slick asphalt. The crowd dispersed, the air cooling. Helen paused, eyes fixed on the horizon where the desert swallowed roads. She clutched the faded flyer once more, edges torn, tape still clinging. She did not throw it away. She folded it carefully, slipped it into her bag, and walked into the night. In the evidence locker, the cracked pen lay in its bag, its ink long dried, its logo fading. Yet under fluorescent light, it gleamed faintly, as if waiting. Silent, ordinary, permanent. The pen lay silent, outlasting every voice in court.